alleged discrepancies there are between the text of Samuel and Chronicles. He did hit on the one where it talked about God inciting David and then Satan inciting David to number the people. So that one's been hit fairly well. In 2 Samuel, these are the three we're going to hit this morning. If you see another one, you can come and talk to me about it, and I'll try to pick up on it, or Brent can try to pick up on it next time. Some of these you have to research a little bit, and so at any rate. So in 2 Samuel, we read about 50 shekels of silver. That's the price paid for the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, where David sacrifices oxen to stay the hand of God against the people. Also, the name Araunah the Jebusite is in 2 Samuel. And when Joab numbers the people, the numbers between the two are different, if you recall. And we'll look at what they are in the First Chronicles account. In First Chronicles, the amount paid for the site was 600 shekels of gold. That's a lot different when you're talking about today's money. 50 shekels of silver today, from what I understand, is around $1,500. 600 shekels of gold is a lot more. It's around $650,000. So a big difference that it says on both of those. Also, it calls the person that he purchased the site from Ornan, the Jebusite. That's a pretty easy one. But the numbers are different as well. For the numbers of Israel, 1.1 million is said to be counted, and 470,000 from Judah, as opposed to 800,000 from Israel and 500,000 from Judah. Now, the reason I bring this up is because we have some parents in here, we have grandparents in here. A lot of you have children, grandchildren, and they are the digital generation. They spend a lot of time online. And I don't know how much time you guys spend online, probably somewhere similar to what I do, which is not a lot. Not that that's a bad thing, not to spend a lot of time online. But what I want to say is discrepancies like this. There are people out there that are approaching young people online and pointing these things out. A lot of times if your kids go to college somewhere that's maybe not a Christian college, they don't go to Florida College, sometimes these things will be brought up by professors, they'll be brought up by older students and things like that for the purpose of making your children or your grandchild doubt the scriptures enough to just walk away from the faith. So when we see these things, we don't need to put blinders on and say, well, there's copyist error every time. Sometimes there's a real reason why there may be a difference in the text. So that's what I want to do for the first 10 minutes or so this morning, and we'll get to our thing. So how much did David pay Araunah? I think this was brought up by someone to Brent last Sunday about how much Araunah paid. 50 shekels of silver or 600 shekels of gold. Big time difference. So if we look at the text, 2 Samuel chapter 24 and verse 24. That's where it says what it says. The king said to Araunah, "No, but I will surely buy it from you for a price, nor will I offer offerings to my Lord my God with that which cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. So no doubt it says that. We're going to skip forward to 1 Chronicles chapter 21. You might want to put your marker there in the Samuel account. But 1 Chronicles chapter 21 and verse 25. There it says, "So David gave Ornan," we'll deal with that name in a minute, 600 shekels of gold by weight for the place. Now, a lot of times what we need to do, there's a lot of times when things are pointed out like this, there's assumptions made, right? And we're not seeing necessarily the big picture. I think we can stay within the text and explain why the two things are different. When you look at the Samuel account, Samuel is kind of written in real time. When David was walking the earth, a little bit after David was king, these things are being written down. We go to the Chronicles account. A lot of times what is happening there is during the captivity, priests are writing these things. They're using the Samuel account, but they're also using some other sources that we probably just don't have. So they're looking back at things. So it specifically says in the text of 2 Samuel that the 50 shekels of silver is paid for the threshing floor. Now, we know a threshing floor is not a big place, but it paid for the threshing floor and the animals that were sacrificed. When you look at the Chronicles account, the 600 shekels of gold is paid for what it calls the site, or the place. Now, the place is what David would buy later. He's going to come back and buy this larger area where the temple's going to be built. If we look at 2 Chronicles chapter 3, we can kind of see that and put two and two together to make four. And there's, one of the things that I want to explain too about these discrepancies where something is being said about the text. All we have to do to do away with a discrepancy is to come up with a logical reason why there's not a discrepancy. We don't have to come up with concrete things and all this kind of stuff. There just needs to be a reason why this is not a discrepancy in the text. So 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 1, it says, "Now Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David, at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite." So he bought this larger place because the temple, as large as it was, and the buildings that go with it, they're not going to fit on a threshing floor. He's going to have to buy more. That's why this text says it was built on Mount Moriah, specifically on the center, on that site where the threshing floor was. So any questions about that one? These are things to kind of tuck in your memory, and if you cross paths with them, with a young person or something like that, you can bring them up and walk them through it. I think these things are very important. So who did David buy the threshing floor from? We've got Araunah. Both of these guys are Jebusites. I think they're the same person, obviously. 2 Samuel 24 and verse 24 calls him Ornan in the Chronicles accounts. 1 Chronicles 21, and as you saw in 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 1. Both are from the same Hebrew root, okay? So these are just different forms. Somebody might call someone Robert, and then call them their name be commonly known as Dick or something like that. David or Dave, that kind of thing. We see that all the time today. They saw the same thing then. But they are the same person, and that's pretty simple to point out. You can really look that up in any commentary. In every commentary I looked at, I think I looked at about 25, they all say the same thing. This is the same person because same root word for the guy. There's no contradiction there. But I have had people bring that up before in Bible studies. Now, how many were counted by Joab? That's a different animal. Now, as I said, I think we can stay in the text, maybe extend the text out. We can stay in the Bible and get the right answers. Not a problem. 2 Samuel chapter 24 and verse 24 says 800,000 were counted in Israel, and then it mentions 500,000 fighting men in Judah. Remember, this is when David numbered the people, wasn't pleasing to God. And so Joab went around doing that. The Chronicles account, as we said already, numbered Israel at 1.1 million and Judah at 470,000. So they're overshooting Israel more than Samuel did and kind of undercutting Judah somewhat. So why would they do that? So the solution of the Chronicles account. 1 Chronicles 21 and verse 6 says Joab did not count Judah. He did not count Levi. That's a pretty big deal. 2 Samuel chapter 6 and verse 1 says in Judah there were 30,000 men in Judah's standing army. So simple math. We add that standing army to what he numbered, what it tells us there were in Judah, and we come up with the same number that's in the Samuel account, which is 500,000. So that's pretty easy. Now, how about the Samuel account? 800,000, so we're 300,000 men short. It doesn't include the standing army, it appears, of Israel, listed in 1 Chronicles chapter 27. You can turn there and look at that if you want to. We're not going to read it because it just takes too much time. But if you count those up, it's 24,000 over and over again. Total comes up to 288,000. We're almost at 300,000 to make that 1.1 million, but we're 12,000 short, right? So if you look at 2 Chronicles chapter 1, 2 Chronicles chapter 1, and verse 14, it says, Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. A lot of commentators think that this is a standing army right there. in Jerusalem that would number 12,000, which would bring our numbers right up to 1.1 million. So now they match. And as I said, you may have some problem with one of the different ones that are used, but you've offered a reasonable explanation of why the text is not at odds with, one text is not at odds with another, which is enough for hopefully most people. All right, let's get on with today's topics. So go ahead and turn to 2 Samuel chapter 21. 2 Samuel chapter 21. We put up there at the end of the class, usually, what to read for next time. This is a lot of reading, really, to do. I had kind of put off David in the temple, the charge to Solomon until last night, and I was kind of sorry I had done that because that's a lot of stuff to go over. In 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 15 through 22. Some interesting stuff here. It talks about some of David's mighty men, but what is specifically being discussed here in the 2 Samuel 21 is what happened to Goliath. And I'm not sure why the focus here is really on Goliath and his sons, but that's the common theme through the rest of this. So let's just read a few verses here, 15 through the end of the chapter. It says, "When the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David and his servants with him went down and fought against the Philistines, and David grew faint. Then Ishbi-Benob, who was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 shekels, who was bearing a new sword, thought he could kill David. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, You shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel. Now it happened afterward that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite killed Saph, who was one of the sons of the giant. Again, there was war at Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jer-oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Now, I do think that particular text in chapter 21 and verse 19, the New King James has kind of been amended to say the brother of Goliath. I think the text of the Hebrew Masoretic text, whatever you want to call it, just says Goliath, the Goliath of Gath. But if you go over in the Chronicles account, it actually says it's a guy named Lami, the brother of Goliath. So, verse 20, Yet again there was war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he also was born to the giants. So when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, killed him. And this is how we know what's been happening here. Back to verse 15. It says, These 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David, by the hand of his servants. So there's a rich history there, as short as it was, between David and Goliath. And I think what God's trying to tell us through the text is that this major enemy of David that kind of brought him to fame, David has completely and thoroughly obliterated him and his memory, so to speak, from the people. And so all these 4 sons of Goliath of Gath are killed by David or his men. Anybody have any points or thoughts on this in 2 Samuel 21? All right. So it's rough reading. We'll move on. Chapter 23 now. Chapter 23. The mighty men of David. Starts in verse 8. I think those first 7 verses handled last class. So there's a few discrepancies here as well. This section of Samuel and Chronicles has these discrepancies in it. None of them are overwhelming, but as I've said, they will be brought up to people that you know, that you care about. So you do well to know they're there and deal with them and be ready to answer someone. Like 1 Peter 3:15, give anyone a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and respect. All right, so verse 8 through 12, chapter 23. These are the names of the mighty men whom David had. Josheb-Basshebeth, the Tachmonite, chief among the captains. He was called Adino the Eznite because he had killed 800 men at one time. So we'll go over with Jashabeth, or Jashab-Bashabath, and you'll notice over in the Chronicles accounts, I believe we're going to be in Chronicles, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles. It'll take me a second to find it. It's chapter 11 of one of the two, and I failed to write it down. We'll go First Chronicles 11 and verse 10. Now these were the heads of the mighty men whom David had, who strengthened themselves with him in his kingdom with all Israel to make him king according to the word of the Lord concerning Israel. And this is the number of the mighty men whom David had. Jashabim, the son of a Hachmonite, chief of the captains, he had lifted his spear against 300, killed by him at one time. So we notice there's a difference. Killed 800 in the Samuel account, says he killed 300 here. There's multiple ways to explain that. Some people think these are two different guys. That's not really feasible, that they're two different people. They come from the same root word too, so you'd be cutting off your nose to spite your face with the other explanation if you said they're two different people. Same root word, it's really the same name. But could be talking about two different battles that is gone with there. Different descriptions. One talks about a spear against these 300, 800. It doesn't mention that to my knowledge, so it could be two different people. This is another place where it could be a copyist error, because when we think about it, from what I have read about the text, and I'm not an expert in it by any stretch of the means, I'm not an expert in anything really, but the text of Samuel is the ones that are in possession of people that can see them is not in as good a shape as the one of Chronicles. So, but nevertheless, could be two different battles. Next guy, Eleazar, and verse 9. After him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo the Ahohite, one of the three mighty men with David when they defied the Philistines who were gathered there for battle. When the men of Israel had retreated, he arose and attacked the Philistines until his hand was weary, and his hand stuck to the sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to plunder. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? What does it say about him? He's fighting Philistines, and what happens to his sword in the hand? Stuck to it. Yeah, exactly. Back in the days before nail guns, a lot of you guys can kind of do that. You might have been building a house or something, and you drive nails for a long, long time, and it's like when you're done, you have to just kind of release that thing. And he experienced that. There's some significance there. There's lessons in these Old Testament texts. I think we just got to, I'm certainly not great at seeing them sometimes. This is one of those things. What is the New Testament sword? The Word is the New Testament sword. He held on his sword so tight and fought with it so hard that he had a hard time just releasing it. Now, what does that say about us, the Christian, and our grip on our sword, the Word? Well, we should hold it tightly. We should use it all the time, where it's just almost hard to put down. So that's kind of one of those things I saw about that. Any thoughts on Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahohite? There's great baby names in this section of Samuel, by the way. All right, so next one, Shammah. 2 Samuel 23 and verse 11. After him was Shammah, the son of Agi, the Hararite. The Philistines had gathered together into a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils. So the people fled from the Philistines, but he stationed himself in the middle of the field, defended it, and killed the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. Some of these things they struck me as weird, right? Reading through them. We're looking back on David's mighty men, these men, great men of valor, and then it talks about a guy defending a field full of lentils. Another text, I won't say a problem necessarily, but if you look at the First Chronicles account, chapter 11, and it says something different there. It says, find it here. It says they stationed themselves in the middle, this is verse 14, in the middle of that field, defended and killed Philistines, so the Lord brought about a great victory. But it says in verse 13, that's where I meant to go. Now there the Philistines were gathered for battle, and there was a piece of ground full of barley. So the people fled from the Philistines, but they stationed themselves in the middle of the field, defended it, and killed the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. This is one may not really know. We're talking about barley versus lentils. Not a big deal, but people will point it out if they're aware of it. The Targum, which is a Aramaic translation of the Old Testament in 1 Chronicles 11:13, actually says for it the field was half lentils and half barley. So that would be the reason for the two. So hopefully that helps us out. Certainly helps me out talking to people. All right, so any questions about these first three of David's mighty men? It kind of splits them up. First three, then we're going to talk about another three, but I only see two mentioned there unless you count Asahel, which I did. 2 Samuel 23, verse 13 through 17, talks about something in the meantime. David's mighty men, remember that's the discussion here. And this happens when David is at the cave of Adullam. Remember I said the last class I taught that a lot of this stuff is written at the end of the book, but it's looking back earlier in David's life. It's not really chronological. This is one of those times. We're not talking about David being an old man and saying, oh, I wish I could have a drink from the well by the gate of Bethlehem. This is when he was young. He's at the cave of Adullam. Y'all remember when he was at the cave of Adullam? When Saul was chasing him. Yeah, he was at the cave of Adullam, and he had these. This is when the mighty men started coming to him. He had those that were aggrieved, those that owed too many taxes, those kind of things. That didn't like the way their life was going, so they came to David at the cave of Adullam. 400 at first, it grew to 600, but they were all with him there, and he was hiding out from Saul. So that's what's being discussed here. Chapter 23 and verse 13 says, Then 3 of the 30 chief men went down at harvest time and came to David at the cave of Adullam. And the troop of Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. And David said with longing, Oh, that someone would give me a drink of water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate. So the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink it, but poured it out to the Lord. And he said, Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is this not the blood of men who went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore, he would not drink it. These things were done by the 3 mighty men. I take that to mean they're done by these we just talked about, which would have been going back. Jashabim, that's a lot easier to say, so we'll take the Chronicles there. Eleazar and Shammah. So these guys, David's at the cave of Adullam. He's younger, in his life. One of the places he hid from Saul. He wants a drink from the well by the gate of Bethlehem, except the problem is it's kind of under Philistine control at the time, and there's actually a garrison there. So 3 of those 3 men broke through the Philistines, got some water from the well, and are bringing it to David. And what does David do with it? He pours it out. You think, what? That's ridiculous. Go ahead. It's kind of you might think drink offering or something like that. He specifically says this is like their blood. Now, what immediately came to my mind when we think Bethlehem, now we're looking at the New Testament, what happened in Bethlehem? Jesus was born, absolutely. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. We think about water and all of that kind of stuff. What's said about water in the New Testament? It's the renewing thing. We look at 1 John 4. There's a lot in John about water. Jesus will become in you a well of water springing up into everlasting life. There's also this juxtaposition of water with blood that we know about, right? When we're baptized literally in water, but what is it representing? It's the blood of Jesus covering us, right? So there's all kind of imagery here that I think that maybe looking back, I don't think they were supposed to see it then, but we look back and we think about these things, and it becomes powerful. So, shall I drink the blood of the men who went in jeopardy of their lives? Now, I will say, you may think, well, you're seeing a lot in the text there. I don't know how much to see in the text, right, as far as that kind of stuff goes. I don't think we need to see too much to take us away from the truth of the gospel, obviously, but to enhance the gospel. And when you see some of these things, it doesn't mean that the entire text has to match up with what the gospel is. Just little shadows of things that we see in the Old Testament that we can say, man, that reminds me of the New Testament. Kind of like the story of Jonah. If you read the story of Jonah, do you come away from Jonah saying, that's Jesus? No, but Jesus pointed out Jonah in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights and said, that's talking about me. Jonah in Nineveh, that wasn't talking about Jesus, and running away wasn't talking about Jesus, but that one little spot was talking about Jesus. So there's some things to see there. I do believe. Any thoughts about this particular thing of David's men bringing him water from Bethlehem? All right, moving on. I'm not doing too bad for time today. All right, 2 Samuel 23, verse 18 through 24 talks about the next 3 mighty men. I think there's 6 that are major, and then the rest of them are just kind of listed out. There's another strange one, I believe, in this one. So Abishai is mentioned, verse 18. It says, now Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of another 3. He lifted his spear against 300 men, killed them, and won a name among these 3. Was he not most honored of the 3? Therefore he became captain. However, he did not attain to the first 3. What have we already read about Abishai? Remember about the giants? Chapter 21, 15 through 22. What had he done? Where he's the one that saved David. He had this, I believe it's Ishbi-Benob was coming against David. He wanted to kill him, but Abishai was the one that stood up and slew that giant. Benaiah is the second one listed here, verse 20. Benaiah was the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel, who had done many deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. I think some versions may say Ariel, sons of Ariel in Moab, or something along those lines. Some Moabites that he killed that were mighty men themselves in some way. He also had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. And he killed an Egyptian, a spectacular man. The Egyptian had a spear in his hand, so he went down to him with a staff, wrested the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and killed him with his own spear. So we got Benaiah, killed 2 sons of Ariel. I don't know if I didn't mention the Egyptian on the screen up here. As I said, some odd stuff is said about some of these guys. Field of lentils or barley and defending the field. Now we've got Benaiah, and one of the things that it mentions about him looking back over David's life and his mighty men is that he went down into a pit or a cistern and killed a lion on a snowy day. I'm not even sure what to do with all that, but both of the Chronicles account and this account mention it. So it's Brother Greg that preaches out at Gooch Lane said, one thing we need to do is when we're reading the Old Testament, look for the weird stuff and kind of look and see what it might mean. And I've looked at this. I think it's weird, but I have no idea what it might mean, so I'm going to have to ask Greg when I see him. What does this lion killed on a snowy day mean? Then it talks about him killing an Egyptian. And so at any rate, Benaiah, one of the mighty men. And some of these people we can see him crossing the river with him when he flees from Absalom. And I think most of these things are happening before the Absalom event actually happens. Asahel, hadn't seen him in a long time, have we? Who is Asahel? Abishai and Joab's brother. What has happened to Asahel? He was killed. And it's been quite a while ago. It's when Saul has died. David is the anointed king, but Abner, which is the commander of the army of Saul, has put Ishbosheth in power. And so they're at war, and Abner kills Asahel. Remember, Asahel is described as what? Being what? Fleet of foot. He's very fleet of foot. So Abner's running, and Asahel's chasing him. He's catching up to him, and Abner tells him multiple times. This happens back in 2 Samuel chapter 2, I believe. He's chasing him, and when he gets close to him, Abner just stabs him from the front to the back with a spear and kills him. And then, of course, Abner is killed by Joab later. So these are the next three mighty men. I believe Asahel's meant to go with them, but the text there is not super clear who the three exactly are, other than Abishai and Benaiah. Anybody have any points you'd like to make or questions about the text here? All right, moving on to the next part. I'm not going to go through the rest of the mighty men one by one. There is one there that you will recognize, and it's the last one mentioned. Anybody who is that? The last mighty man mentioned. Uriah the Hittite. That's one of those things for David. That's got to be a heart-wrenching thing to see, that this is one of these guys that would run through a brick wall for me, and what have I done to him? Well, not anything good at all. So let's move on now. First Chronicles, go over to the Chronicles account. First Chronicles chapter 22. And this kind of skips around. You read through this, and you get to the end of the Chronicles, and say, well, it's talking about the same thing again. And that's why I put two different texts up here. Chapter 22 is talking about this preparation for the temple, and chapter 29, verse 1 through 9, is kind of David telling Solomon, this is what I've done for the preparation of the temple. Another interesting thing here, as I mentioned, these little tidbits you can see from a New Testament mindset, and they make you think about certain things. It says, chapter 22, verse 1, then David said, this is the house of the Lord God, and this is the altar of burnt offering for Israel. So David commanded to gather the aliens who were in the land of Israel, and he appointed masons to cut hewn stones to build the house of God. So from a New Testament standpoint, the church is made up of people that were Jewish and decided, I'm going to obey, the Messiah has come. But it's also made up of Gentiles, foreigners, right, who want to take on Jesus and have him save them. So what do those two groups of people make up in the New Testament? They're living stones in the house of God, aren't they? So now we look back at this, and you have David. Of course, there's going to be Israelites making the temple, but he also gets the foreigners throughout the land and says, you're going to be stonemasons. The stones that you're going to hew for us are going to go into this temple. It's kind of a shout back when you get to the New Testament. It seems like, at least it makes me think of that. So he set these foreigners in the land to be stoneworkers. What other group had he set to be, not David, but I guess it would be Joshua, set to be workers like that? Back in Joshua chapter 9 or 10, I think it's 9, but talked a lot about Gibeon lately in the class. Remember the Gibeonites? We talked about them coming to Joshua, said, we're from a long way away, and we want to make covenant with you and all those kind of things. And so he made a covenant with them. They had to keep the covenant, but what they did was make them woodcutters and water carriers for the house of the Lord back there in the Joshua account. There's too many J's back there. Judges, Joshua, that kind of stuff. All right. So it also says, and we're in chapter 22, and David, verse 3, and David prepared iron in abundance for the nails of the doors of the gates, for the joints, and bronze in abundance beyond measure. So he got all the metal together. You're going to need nails. You're going to need corner brackets and all this different kind of things that are needful for building a wooden structure, which he mentions in the next part, chapter 22 and verse 4. Cedar trees in abundance, for the Sidonians and those from Tyre brought much cedar wood to David. So he's gotten all these at least it mentions these. He set the workers up that are going to hew the stone, set aside the iron. He set aside some cedar beams that they would cut up entire inside and send down. They did that by raft, it tells us, and brought them over to the site. Did something similar with the stone. They weren't supposed to hear any sound of chisel or hammer at the site, so they had to hew these stones at different places. And we're talking about 3,000 years ago. Hew these stones at another place that were going to be brought to this site to be pieced together like a puzzle. Just an amazing thing to think about. These people were incredibly bright and meticulous in the way that they went about things. Their buildings were probably better than ours. So David charges Solomon next here to build the temple. Chapter 23. I said we'll have to get through a little bit here. This is also in chapter 28. Let's skip forward. Before we get to that far, I had mentioned chapter 29. But we're not going to read the rest of 22. It talks about how much David has prepared for the house so that Solomon doesn't have to spend time doing that type of thing. But we will read what's in chapter 29, those first 9 verses. It says, "Furthermore, King David said to all the assembly, 'My son Solomon, whom God has chosen, is young and inexperienced. The work is great, because the temple is not for man, but for the Lord God. Now for the house of my God I have prepared with all my might gold for things to be made of gold, silver for things of silver, bronze for things of bronze, iron for things of iron, wood for things of wood, onyx stones to be set, glistening stones of various colors, all kinds of precious stones, and marble slabs in abundance. Moreover, because I have set my affection on the house of my God, I have given to the house of my God over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house, my own special treasures of gold and silver, 3,000 talents of gold, of the gold of Ophir, and 7,000 talents of refined silver to overlay the walls of the houses, the gold for the things of gold, and silver for things of silver, and for all kinds of work to be done by the hands of craftsmen. Who then is willing to consecrate himself this day to the Lord?' Then the leaders of the fathers' houses, leaders of the tribes of Israel, captains of thousands and hundreds, and officers over the king's work offered willingly. They gave for the work of the house of God 5,000 talents and 10,000 derricks of gold, 10,000 talents of silver, 18,000 talents of bronze, and 100,000 talents of iron. And whoever had precious stones gave them to the treasury of the house of the Lord, into the hand of Jehiel the Gershonite. Then the people rejoiced, for they had offered willingly, because with a loyal heart they offered willingly to the Lord. And King David also rejoiced greatly." So David then goes in chapter 23 and in chapter 28 recounts it, and he charges Solomon to build the temple. He says, "I wasn't allowed to build it." Now, why wasn't David allowed to build the temple? You've been a man of bloodshed. That's true. There's no doubt about that. It was due to bloodshed. He promised that Solomon would be able to do it. That's what God promised to David, your son Solomon. And Solomon, the name is derived from the Hebrew word shalom, which means peace. Solomon is going to be a king of peace. Now, a lot of times, the peace didn't necessarily work out for him the way we would hope it would. He falls away. Some indication that at the end of his life he would come back from that, according to Ecclesiastes. But David prays for Solomon to have wisdom. And remember, Solomon's going to specifically ask for wisdom from God when God asked him, "Ask me what you want." And he ends up getting a lot more. So David prays for Solomon to obey God and be brave. Be brave, because it's going to be a difficult thing to do, building this house. All right. Now, he also talks about setting up the Levites, chapter 23 through 26. Specifically, the Levites are mentioned here, and there were 38,000 men, 24,000 he assigned to work directly at the temple. We're just going to give numbers for these things. 6,000 were going to be officials and judges. That brings us to 30,000. 4,000 are going to be the keepers of the gate. It's a lot of gatekeepers. I don't know how many gates there were, but I mean, you know, you might get a round every 6 months of 100 guards, and 4,000 were to be musicians. So, all right, Wednesday, the text you're going to have to remember is 1 Kings chapter 1. That's an easy one. So, anyway, thank you for your attention and participation this morning.